February 1872, Upper Missouri watershed. Air temperature 5 below zero at dawn, rising no higher than 12 degrees by afternoon. A woodsman crossing a swollen 40-foot river slips midstream, losing his tinderbox and flint, and with them the one tool every frontier manual insisted came before all else: fire. Men at trading posts mocked anyone who chose bedding and insulation over sparks, calling it foolish thrift. Yet this courier had learned from older trappers and native guides who understood how cold truly kills. With no fire for 7 nights, he built heat instead: pine needles, bark, spruce boughs, and wind-cut rock pockets, while nearby trappers, relying on failed fires, suffered burns and exposure. What he knew about how heat leaves the body kept every finger and toe intact, and rewrote a rule everyone else thought was settled. If you respect real stories that carry lessons worth passing on, make sure to subscribe. There are more historical accounts ahead. Comment your city and time so we know where this documentary found you. We appreciate every viewer who joins in. The river ran 40 feet wide that morning, swollen with snowmelt from upstream tributaries. The woodsman had crossed this braid a dozen times before, always finding the same line of stones that broke the current into manageable gaps. He stepped onto the first stone, then the second, his pack shifting as he balanced against the pull of water, moving at perhaps 3 feet per second. Midway across, where the third stone should have been, there was only current. His boot went through. The cold hit his leg like a blade. He caught himself on the next stone, but his belt pouch had already opened. The tinderbox went under first, a small brass cylinder that had seen him through 2 winters. The flint followed, tumbling away in brown water, too fast to catch. He stood there for 5 seconds, water soaking through wool to skin, calculating what had just been lost. No sparks, no coals. 12 miles from the nearest post, with daylight already shortening and wind coming steady out of the northwest. He finished the crossing and wrung out his pant leg as best he could, then started walking. Fire was the standard answer, but fire required dry tinder, shelter from wind, and time he might not have. The alternative had always been there, taught by men who traveled winter ground without metal or matches. He would build warmth a different way. By 4:30, the light was failing. He found what he needed a quarter mile off the main trail, a wind-carved pocket in sandstone, opening no more than 3 feet wide, carved deep enough to sit upright. The rock face blocked northwest wind entirely, reducing exposure by roughly 70% compared to open ground. He started gathering immediately. Pine needles first, the driest he could find beneath low branches where snow had not penetrated. He stripped inner bark from dead pine using his knife, shredding it into loose fibers that would trap air. The ground layer went down 10 inches thick, then 12, built up until his hand disappeared past the wrist when he pressed down. Over that he laid spruce boughs, butt ends pointing inward, so the needles formed overlapping scales like roof shingles. He reversed his wool coat so the nap faced inward against his shirt, creating a dead air pocket against his torso. Overhead he wove a lattice of thicker boughs, not to block wind but to reduce radiant heat loss upward into clear sky. The work took 50 minutes. When he finally lay down, horizontal to conserve calories, he could feel the difference immediately. The microclimate inside the pocket was perhaps 15 degrees warmer than the wind outside. No flame, just physics. He moved only 2 hours each day, always in afternoon light when the sun raised ambient temperature by a few degrees. Sweat was the enemy now. Moisture against skin would pull heat faster than wind alone. He gathered as he walked, inner cambium from pine bark, frozen service berries still clinging to bare branches, cattail roots dug from creek edges where ice had not yet thickened past 6 inches. Water came from melting ice chips in his mouth, never snow. Snow required body heat to convert, stealing calories he could not spare. Each evening he built a new shelter, never sleeping where dampness had collected in the ground. Rock pockets when he found them, dense spruce groves when he did not. The routine never varied. 45 minutes to gather and build, then horizontal until first light. Night temperatures dropped to 10 below by his estimate, cold enough that his breath froze on stone above his head. But his fingers stayed warm. His toes stayed warm. No shivering spirals that burned through reserves. By the 7th morning, he had lost perhaps 3 pounds, no more than rationed intake would account for. He could still walk without trembling. The post was 8 miles ahead. He would reach it before noon. He smelled smoke before he saw the post. Wood smoke from morning fires drifting through cottonwoods along the river. The factor was outside when he arrived, splitting kindling near the supply shed. The man looked up, took in the woodsman's appearance, and said nothing for a long moment. Inside, over coffee, the story came out in pieces. The stepping stones had been removed deliberately 3 weeks prior during a boundary dispute between trappers working opposite banks. 2 men had died attempting the crossing that month, both caught on the far side without fire after their kits were lost or soaked through. They had tried building flames on open ground, failed in the wind, and frozen before morning. The factor admitted he had sent runners with warnings, but the woodsman had already been beyond contact when the stones went missing. Then the questions started. How deep was the bedding? What materials exactly? How he selected shelter sites? The woodsman held his hands apart, wrist to fingertips. "Past your wrist," he said. "Always past your wrist." The men who had mocked needle gathering as wasted daylight now copied measurements into margins of route logs. No apologies were offered. None were expected. Numbers mattered more than pride. By 1878, winter travel guides along the upper Missouri corridor included specific entries on needle beds and rock pocket selection. Scouts carrying mail between posts now packed spare insulation knowledge the way earlier men had packed extra flint. The techniques spread quietly, passed through demonstration rather than written instruction. A winter scout that year recorded building his first fireless shelter under guidance from a trapper who had heard the account secondhand. The method worked exactly as described. Post journals over the following decade showed a measurable decline in cold exposure deaths along routes where the practice had taken hold. Men still carried fire kits, still built flames when conditions allowed, but the hierarchy had shifted. Insulation came first, sparks came second. The woodsman himself continued running winter routes until 1881, then disappeared from records without ceremony. His name survives only in marginal notes and second-hand references. But the method outlasted him. Modern survival manuals quietly echo the same principle, often without knowing its origin. On the frontier, the men who lived longest were not the ones who made the biggest fires, but the ones who understood how heat actually leaves the body.